Hello. And this is Mav from the future of this particular episode. And I'm here with Wayne. Hey, Wayne.
Hey, Mav.
So this is a little weird. I'm sort of doing this, I'm editing the episode that everybody else is about to listen to. But we recorded this a week and a half ago for us. So in real time before it dropped. But for us now in the future of when we recorded it, we are the day after something really sad happened.
Yeah, which we feel a need to address.
Mm-hmm. Chadwick Boseman, the actor who portrays Black Panther, and therefore one of the, probably one of the most relevant movie franchises to people who listen to our show, died. Suddenly to everybody else, but sadly and suddenly this weekend. And apparently he died of a long 4-year battle with colon cancer that no one outside of his closest family and friends knew he had.
And continued to work during that time and not just work on films, but to be a pretty stunning presence in the lives of lots of people. We were discovering he was visiting other cancer patients, doing a lot of good work, just genuinely being a superhero in the real world as well as on screen.
Mm-hmm. And, as far as we can tell, I mean, again, we don't know him, but as far as we can tell, just from the tons of stuff that I've read these last couple of days, he was diagnosed while he was filming Black Panther. I guess he didn't, when he took the part in Civil War, he didn't know, but he's known about it pretty much the entire time he's been, he was an actor before, but the entire time that he's been a huge Hollywood name, he's known about this and has been fighting it and has been as inspirational a force as probably anybody could ever ask for to be the first mainstream blockbuster Black superhero. So I just, it's shocking. I've posted memes about this. Like pretty much everybody I know who is into this kind of geeky stuff that we're into is just heartbroken.
Yeah. So we wanted to post a quick acknowledgement of this before we get into the episode. So rest in power and Wakanda forever.
Absolutely. Wakanda forever. And now we return you to the regular show.
In less than an hour, aircraft from here will join others from around the world. And you will be launching the largest aerial battle in the history of mankind. Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today. We can't be consumed by our petty differences anymore.
Back to Vox Podcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with the full crew, Hannah and Wayne and Katya. How's it going, Katya?
Okay.
That's a loaded question these days. I'm just not going to respond.
I feel like I could start singing REM, but then they'd hit us with the copyright violations. Yeah. And also no one wants to hear me sing.
Especially now that we're on the YouTubes.
Yeah, no one wants to hear me sing. I've joked many a time that my range is somewhere between Kermit the Frog and Kesha before she stopped doing so much rap.
Well, without singing and flagging us for copyright violation, what REM song would you sing, and how can that segue into today's topic?
It's the end of the world.
Yeah.
As we know it.
As we know it.
You feel fine? I do not feel fine.
No,
or just period. Possibly.
Yeah, just it's the end of the world, because we'll get to the different types of end of the world narratives, but a lot of the common ones are weather, natural disaster involving space objects, a plague,
pandemics, murder hornets, actually a thing in 50 sci-fi films.
Fire.
Highly exaggerating.
Yeah, if you look at a map of the U.S. and look at all the natural disasters occurring, it doesn't look good. It looks like Like when Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec like did a pandemic like trial run and tried to destroy it, and like drew like had tornado quakes and drew on a board. And this is a very minor reference in a comedy that ended many years ago. The world kind of looks like that. Like they were exaggerating for comedy, but the world looks like that now. To be honest.
I'm just really tired because I'm preparing for class. I'm exhausted. School starts tomorrow for me, which was, I mean, I guess as you're listening to this a week ago, so I could be dead by now. I'm teaching like 4 classes at 2 different universities, one of which I found out about like a couple of days ago. I haven't slept, y'all.
To be honest, if you're dead, they probably aren't listening to this podcast.
Oh, you guys aren't going to edit it without me? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you have all the fancy equipment and such, and the audio files.
That's true.
Yeah, you have the audio
So
files.
if you're dying, send us the audio files.
Yeah. On my deathbed, please.
Right. As we know, this will be your priority.
Yeah.
Or the podcast will just be delayed because as you know, your estate is being handled. We will get the podcast.
My estate.
I guess we could do some sort of in
$47
memoriam.
I have to my name.
I mean, hey man. I mean, you've got a lot of geek stuff. That's gotta go somewhere.
Yeah.
Unless Steph is just gonna hoard it all and sit on top of it like a dragon.
I mean, you do have a Marble League t-shirt. That's worth something.
That's true.
Anyway, my impending demise aside, we're talking about the end of the world today. So we've got a guest that now it's weird because a lot of times I say, we've got a guest that's got some experience. I don't know how much experience. we have Brian Bennett from the Church of the Geek podcast. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Mav. Hey, everybody.
So, Brian, do you have experience ending the world? Not exactly.
Well, not that I can talk about. But I was once part of I did once have a research grant from the Department of Defense. Does that count?
Probably.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah, that's closer.
I'm curious as to what actually this was. I understood you were a researcher on religion. Have I misunderstood something?
I also used to have a research grant for the Department of Defense. People change, Katya.
Yes, before I became a pastor, I was working on a PhD in low temperature physics and acoustics.
Okay. So, the world makes slightly more sense. Slightly. But.
Just only a little bit. Yeah. Hey, you did forget also in the things that are going down in 2020, you forgot the comet.
Yeah.
Signs, portents in the heavens.
Yeah. There's been a lot.
I mean,
sometimes I feel like 2020 is like the year. Like, remember when all the people were freaking out that like, oh, the gays are getting married. God is gonna, rain hellfire. No, it was Trump and with separating families at the border, plus the rise of authoritarianism, plus all the other stuff. And then you get 2020. This is. I'm not a particularly religious person / at all, but I would buy that narrative. I would buy it.
I want everybody to remember.
Actually, you're getting really. I think you're getting really close to some of. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there were feral hogs. That was like 6 months ago. Okay. Do you remember like Australia was on fire? All of Australia. That was February. Like, how
it's been a long year.
It was like 3 years ago, wasn't it, Mav?
No.
I think I turned 30 in March, in April, shortly after the lockdown started in the U.S. in March. I feel like I'm going to hit 40 by next March.
I just said I was going to be dead. So.
Well,
I mean, I did say in the blog that people have been, instead of just joking like, oh yeah, the end of the world is coming, I've seen loads of people on Twitter being like, sweet release, let the comet hit, take me.
People I've seen a lot of people like more on a practical note and a rather serious one. Like a lot of people are talking about getting, wills in order and things like that.
Yeah.
Because everyone in this country is being forced to go to work when it's not safe.
I have to go teach kids who have germs.
Yeah. And a lot of it has been teachers. Like I've seen a lot of teachers either leaving their jobs of 10, 20, 30 years because of health issues, because they're, for whatever reason, they're not in a position to take that health risk. Yeah. Or just other people just sort of generally things are uncertain right now. I'm going to make sure my paperwork is in order just in case.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of before this reached a crisis. I saw a lot of articles talking about your money or your life in terms of academic speak. And then I was like, oh, well, this is foretold our current situation. I've seen so many people talk about how a lot of the reasons why people have to go back to work, it's just because like they can't afford not to. So it's
Absolutely.
like it's like a systemic problem, as like if you follow like anybody on Twitter, like, or maybe not anybody, Trump.
Well, Trump has his own special version of reality that exists only in his own mind. And I mean, we've been talking about for, I feel like, on the podcast for the last several months, is like a lot of these issues, while they've been hitting a point, like a high point in some sense, and are getting media attention particularly more often than they normally do, like a lot of the problems that you're talking about are issues that existed before. Like we've talked for, at this point years about problems in academia, problems in labor, problems in capitalism, of all of the things that are basically like coming to a head because of a pandemic, not to mention also, see our recent Black Lives Matter related episodes talking about, it is no mistake that we're hitting a very intense moment in the civil rights movement at the same time as a pandemic that's making basically everybody's lives like strained in a historically unprecedented way, probably since, the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're about to see, unless something happens massively in the next couple of months, if not weeks, like we're about to see probably the largest homeless population that the United States has ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw a meme, someone wishing they lived in precedented times.
I saw that too. It would be nice, like a little bit of precedent, like some balance. See that maybe this is all of it's academia for too long has been asking us to do unprecedented work, and then suddenly the world has decided, like, well, you really want that?
So, end of the world.
Yeah.
So, are we talking about narratives or just the general concept of apocalypse?
Yeah, I guess that's on you, because like originally it was, we were talking about narratives, right? But then like Ryan had some interesting thoughts.
Well, originally, like, I don't know, in the before times, what I really wanted to do was just talk about Good Omens, because it was the only thing I've ever been happy Amazon has done in its entire existence, probably. And
Miss Maisel was pretty cool.
I mean, come on. If you want to talk about systemic problems, just listen to another podcast to analyze Amazon correctly. But as we were like thinking about things, I was like, oh, Good Omens is relevant again, because like it does feel a little bit like the end of the world. Things are going crazy. Academics in all fields are like pulling out narratives of like, and by all fields, I mean literature, at this particular moment in time. Like they're pulling out narratives of like, 18th centuryists are like, oh, Mary Shelley wrote The Last Man, which is about a plague hitting like the Earth's population and like wiping everyone but one dude out. Spoiler alert. And if you think, oh, that sounds pretty cool, she wrote Frankenstein, this is like a very interesting novel. It is, but also not in the way you think. And then, for years, like the Anthropocene, which I think I should probably explain what that is.
Please do.
The Anthropocene has been like the big like thing.
Also, for people who have not been students of Nancy Armstrong, may have heard it as the Anthropocene.
Yes. I don't even care about how to pronounce words anymore. We're in the world. So anyway, the Anthropocene or the Anthropocene, depending on if you've talked to someone else, is like the idea that humans have, at least in most cases, have negatively impacted like the Earth's climate and brought about climate change and disrupted like natural like systems. And a lot of scholars, at least in literature, probably because they're 19th centuryists, like trace it back to, like industrialization. And, it's thinking about
basically
go ahead.
It basically describes the period in which like human beings as a species are recognized as a like major environmental and geological force. So and basically that human beings, why it's called like, if you've heard the term anthropocentric, and the Anthropocene is, and now you've got me saying it, God. But it's basically like in the same way anthropocentric describes like things that are centered on human beings. But yeah, the Anthropocene is basically like kind of, I think sometimes in some ways it's like, well, what happens when the world is some ways anthropocentric, and that human beings become the thing that define what the globe is like. And as Hannah mentioned, like this is generally has a negative connotation in that like once human beings became an environmental and geological force, it did bad things.
So I don't know if that answered our question.
I mean, I think it's all those things. I think we tend to approach this stuff as narratives just because that's our background and what we all do. Mm-hmm. But Brian, your comments on the post, I just brought a point of view that I think most of us who aren't religious studies scholars don't think of. I mean, when we think of apocalyptic and Revelations, we think of, oh my God, the world is ending in fire and ice and whatever. And you pointed out a more positive interpretation of that. At least that was my understanding of it.
Yeah, positive is one way to look at it. It has to do with the genre of apocalyptic literature in general, right? And that it's very rarely truly apocalyptic. We don't really get a true apocalypse in popular culture. We get all of the death and destruction and mayhem, right? But it's actually, it's one reason I actually dig Good Omens a ton, because I feel like there's a very real aspect. Like, it's not just get to the destruction and everything's over, or because I think often when we talk about post-apocalyptic stories, narratives, there is in the true genre of apocalypse, there is no post-apocalypse except for something that is completely different and new. So from apocalypticism, which comes out particularly out of the Jewish and Christian literature, there is a present evil age and a future good age, and there is a definitive sort of cataclysm in between. So there's a break between the two ages, and it's that in the biblical apocalypses, it's God destroys the old evil age and brings about a new evil, and it can't be done any other way. Everything has gotten so bad and evil that the only thing that can happen is a direct intervention, right?
Is this like the biblical Noah's Ark situation of like 40 days and 40 nights kind of deal?
No, it's bigger. Noah is not an apocalypse, although unless you watch Aronofsky's Noah, which is based on like Gnostic Jewish texts, Jewish apocalyptic texts, which is really fun, but it's not Noah.
It was fun.
Okay, I love apocalypses. I come from a tradition. I come from a tradition that doesn't really.
We're going through this, Brian.
Okay, all right, I did it. No. So I'm a Lutheran. I'm a Lutheran pastor, and like Martin Luther, if he could have gotten rid of the book of Revelation from the canon, he would have. He was not a fan of the canon. He couldn't reconcile a loving God with the Christ that's portrayed with the iron rod coming out of his mouth to bring death and destruction. Right. That for him, it was very hard to reconcile those two images, and it's not a big part of my. It's not part of a kerygma. It's not the core part of our proclamation. But we deal with it, right? So I do dig it.
Hold on, Britt. We should point out that you already said the apocalypse has in the Christian tradition the apocalypse is more than just the destructive part. In analogs in other traditions, for instance, in the Nordic tradition, Norse mythology, Ragnarok is the apocalypse, but there's an aftertime too.
It's a cycle, right?
Yeah, the actual destructive part of all the four horsemen coming and all the fire raining down from the skies. That part of the Bible is relatively short. I mean, like it's in one book, and it's not the entire book of Revelation.
And it's a prelude to a better world, as Brian said. Well, and it's like it's so many of our narratives seem to have gotten stuck on the dystopian part of apocalypse without being able to.
We like the cool part where everybody's dying because it makes for a good movie.
Yeah, right.
And I think there's a key difference between dystopia and apocalypse, because I think, and I think it's exactly this kind of thing that Matt, you noted, and Brian, you introduced, is that like, and I'm speaking as a science fiction person, scholar thing, whatever it is they do, is that like dystopia isn't like I would even like distinguish dystopia from post-apocalyptic genres, at least because I think that like you can often have dystopias without apocalypse.
Yes.
Most literary like dystopias I can like name off the top of my head, I would not identify as a post-apocalypse. For example, like George Orwell.
Or Hunger Games.
Or the Hunger Games. Is because they're looking at, like, dystopias are often looking at dysfunctional societies specifically. So, for example, like, even though I think in an example, like, hey, the, rain and hellfire is happening. Like, an environmental disaster does not inherently cause a dystopia. It can, if that environmental disaster causes, for example, back to like Louisiana post Katrina, reveals a bunch of the dystopian aspects of society, or you could even talk about, that happening with the current pandemic. It's so like those, like the disaster aspect that we might associate with a particular genre of apocalyptic fiction or apocalyptic reality, as I guess we're kind of talking about. That might reveal a dystopia, but you can also just have dystopias or like for example, like Brave New World. There's no disaster in Brave New World. Brave New World is a dystopia because society evolved into that. It evolved into a very capitalist, consumerist society full of eugenics and things like that. Not because of just there was an instigating moment of like the world has fallen apart. Is actually the opposite. Like the world has built itself up into this, and now at the end of it, we're like it alludes to a somewhat, I would say like somewhat biblical, like no, we need to bring about the end times, even though it never actually happened in the novel.
Same thing with everything from Blade Runner in 1984. I think we should probably do a utopias and dystopias show eventually. Yeah. But I think it is important though to point out that distinction. We add them together. Just again, I think this is a problem of Hollywood, right? Like we add them together because the interesting story visually is to look at your Planet of the Apes destructive. In the blog on Hannah's call for comments, I use The Day After Tomorrow. There are so many movies that is like, the world has suffered. You can tell because look what's happened to the Statue of Liberty. Like that.
I think that's actually a really good point because like so often when we see like dystopia, like movies identified as dystopian or post-apocalyptic, they're actually neither, except for they have an aesthetic.
Yeah.
That we identify with those things. Right. And there's a big difference between a dystopian or apocalyptic aesthetic and a dystopian or apocalyptic like story, narrative, genre in the more technical sense.
Mm-hmm.
Also, can I just say that The Day After Tomorrow is, according to a paleoclimatologist, William Hyde, who at the time was at Duke when it came out, he was so angry about how like the climate change was portrayed that he said that people would have to pay him to watch the movie, and people raised money to get him to watch the movie.
Wow. Is this like a viable career option? Because I can do that. I'm totally all about.
I feel like if it is a viable career option, Mav, you are the ideal person for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Pay me to watch movies and give you your like. I'll totally do that.
I mean, isn't that what we're trying to do with this podcast?
Well, I guess in a way, but I mean, do I even have to? I mean, did he have to? Did he like what write up opinions and stuff?
It was like $100, and I think like some like group was trolling him. But he said, "quote This movie is to climate science as Frankenstein is to a heart transplant surgery."
Yes, and your point was I don't believe that Frankenstein or Day After Tomorrow was claiming to be either of those things.
Yes. I simply think it's funny. There is no point to this except
the main association I have with that movie is my dad, for some reason, for an entire year when he was going through the medical treatment, watched that on repeat. So in my household, it's known as Day After Tomorrow next week.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of the sort of the disaster movies ever really get the disasters right, especially like asteroid comet movies that are slamming into the Earth.
Yep.
Those are terrible, in a sense, terrible science. They happen far too quickly, and
you need you need a good drilling crew. Everybody knows that.
Yes. Definitely.
Yeah, don't need to be an astronaut. Need to be good at drilling.
That's right.
So I know one of the things we've talked about, I know for like years at this point between this group is like I've noticed like there's different. So, okay, looking at the history of science fiction, science fiction isn't the only place where you get dystopian and like post-apocalyptic narratives, far from it. But I think like part of the reason I find science fiction fascinating is it's kind of like the quintessential genre of the 20th and 21st centuries, because it kind of, at least in the United States in a Western context, kind of kicks off at the beginning of the 21st century. And it's really like the genre of the post-industrial world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably of genre fiction, it's one of the most sort of like modern in the sense of current. And it's also one of the more of one of the like subgenres, things like horror, sci-fi, romance. It's one of the more longer lasting ones. It doesn't go through the same kind of periods as has been associated with other genres. But like at the beginning of the 20th century, like shortly after the industrialization, like it's very, I wouldn't say utopian. There's actually a lot of literature and a lot of actually my research was about all of the dystopian sort of like actually everything is going horribly wrong because you're about to build an atom bomb kind of world. There's a, one of the first times a sci-fi writer is interviewed is Isaac Asimov being asked to comment on the testing of the atom bomb. And one of his quotes is basically like, this should show all of you that all the sci-fi authors and the fantasy authors you've been dismissing for, decades, if not centuries, going back to people like Mary Shelley. And he basically like this proves that we're all a bunch of, I believe the phrase he uses is wailing Cassandras. Like, we've been telling you that the apocalypse is nigh, basically. But there's still a lot of, I think, more optimism when you're looking at even into like the 30s and 40s. But basically when cyberpunk and a few other like subgenres of science fiction at the latter half of the 20th century start emerging, you start seeing a much darker, dystopian, Blade Runner-esque kind of sci-fi. And I think that's reflected in a lot of other aspects of literature as well. And then in the last, I would say, couple of decades, the amount of what I think most people would identify as post-apocalyptic narratives, like things like Breaking Bad. Is that what I'm thinking of?
No. Walking Dead.
Are you thinking of The Walking Dead?
I'm thinking of The Walking Dead. Yeah. Thank you. The other one. I was like, wait a second. That's not. I don't actually watch television, guys.
Wait.
The other AMC show. Yeah.
The other AMC show I don't watch.
Breaking Bad is about.
Yeah, the Walking Bad.
I don't know. I was trying to remember the other one with the zombies. No, Breaking Bad is the one with the drugs.
Okay.
Yes, I know. I just don't really like either of them.
Well,
oh my god.
I don't either. So
I don't like television, guys. Unless there's vintage clothes for me to flip out over, I don't watch television. That is actually 100% accurate.
I guess Doctor Who falls under that category.
Yes. That's,
although there is the fan theory that says that Breaking Bad is meth causes the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
I have actually heard this on the Reddits.
So
I have heard this on the Reddits.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if Brian, you have thoughts on it seems like there's more post-apocalyptic stories than there used to be, or at least we think about them more often than I think about even in my childhood in the 90s. Is that a sense that other people share? And I wonder, do you have a sense for why we find those appealing?
I think one of the realities is science fiction does, while there are the Shelleys and stuff coming in, basically, I think a lot of the science fiction stuff starts basically as just a modified, rebooted swashbuckling, right? Think back at the early, right?
It's originally young boys' adventure fiction in the 20s. Right. That's its origins.
So, but as people write more and more, and authors write these stories, particularly as we enter the nuclear age, right? I think that's the beginning of a place for us to go, oh crap, the end is a whole lot closer. It's now like a button push away, right? And now, so you've got the nuclear age, then we get climate change, right? All of these resources, non-renewable resources and fossil fuels and, acid rain. And suddenly we start to get elements that are really focused on our lives. These are real threats. How close are we? And what was it yesterday? We passed the, what was it? The day of the year where we have used up more than we could definitely renew over the course of the year, right? So here in the mid-August, we've used more during this year than we could ever replace in the year. We are more aware of the impact that we have on the world and how things are spiraling downward. And I just think that that's an element for us to be able to go, we need a voice. We need a prophetic voice.
Yeah, I don't know if there's more. I do think there's something cyclical. As the old guy on the podcast, my preteen and teen years on TV was filled with Planet of the Apes and the Omega Man and
Planet of the Apes, the series.
Planet of the Apes, the series, and Logan's Run, and what's the one the food is made out of people?
Soylent Green.
Soylent Green.
So in the early 70s, there was just a raft of that sort of thing, just tons of it, and that's the science fiction movie stuff I cut my teeth on.
Yeah.
But it did seem to go out of favor, and there's more of it right now. But I do think there seems to be something sick.
Because I'm wondering about that. I'm thinking about, so we had, it changed looks, right? I think that one of the things that we're doing right now is we're sort of gluing together. Katya, you said at the very beginning that dystopias and apocalyptic narratives are not the same thing. Brian, you said that as well when you're talking about the way apocalypses look in actual religion versus the way they look in well, oh God, I would say, our typical summer blockbuster. And then I remember we didn't have any of those this year.
Yeah.
New
Mutants next week.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but the way these things look, but if I'm thinking about it, like I think that the modern apocalyptic film, our hey, how much stuff can we destroy? We're really just trying to capture the lightning in a bottle that was Independence Day over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, that's not like, I don't know that there's breaks so much as we have these key moments of like Blade Runner is this definitive film that is a stake in the ground. Independence Day is this definitive film that was a stake in the ground. Probably Soylent Green and
the look of science fiction films changed in the 70s because of Star Wars.
Right.
Everything we just listed was pre-Star Wars, and then suddenly we have Star Wars, and it's all the swashbuckling thing again. Much more of that.
But I mean, these never like Planet of the Apes to things like Walking Dead. There's a clear line that you can draw.
Yeah.
I mean, like the fact that Brian mentioned that there is like a hope of a better world. Like it reminded me of a book that I'm pretty sure no one else has read. Called Romantic.
Welcome to all academic books ever.
Yeah. Romantic. You knew as soon as I said that you're like, it's an academic book. Romantic Revelations, Visions of a Post-Apocalyptic Life and Hope in the Anthropocene by Chris Washington, who's like romanticist who studies, early 19th century, late 18th century literature. And so in this book, and I'll link to it in the show notes, he actually like looks at like romanticist authors like Mary Shelley and even Jane Austen, who I would not think of as a post-apocalyptic author, but
she's got zombies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, she doesn't have the zombies.
I'm not even.
I'm not going there. But there were these moments in the world where like life was being disrupted, like our lives, really, as we knew it. It was the end of the world as they know it. And every Jane Austen novel, in my opinion, is about like how to like reconstruct a world and reimagine a better world. And like he's thinking about like apocalypse in like this like concept of hope. And like as the summary of the book says, in thinking about life after disaster, Washington contends that these authors craft an optimistic vision of the future that leads to a new politics. And like honestly, like a lot of post-apocalyptic narratives that I've read recently do that. Like David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas thinks about this. Colson Whitehead's Zone 1, which is a zombie narrative that I think is a page turner, and Josh says is a plotting mediation on late capitalism, like does this toward the end. Like I think Walking Dead
isn't that what page turner means?
We're a unique people, man.
Right.
I think that like some of the things with Walking Dead, when I like bothered to pay attention, was thinking about how do you like construct a community out of the ashes, though it seemed to be very
I was going to say the end of that series is very much about, I mean, the first part is survival, but by the end of that series, the comic series anyway, it's about rebuilding the world. The zombies become a tertiary threat in that world. It's very much about how do we build community? This is what the world is now.
Right.
How do we build community? How do we go back to some semblance of normal in these circumstances? And in the comic series, you see that happen. I mean, it's not a utopia by any long stretch of the imagination, but they have rebuilt a world.
And I remember I mentioned in the blog the Left Behind series,
Yes.
which traumatized me as a child / teenager.
Did they make you watch them, or did you? I mean, did you watch them?
I read them. No, I read them. I read them. Like,
okay.
I grew up in a conservative Christian church, and I don't know exactly why, because my parents did not agree with the views of that church. But anyway, they had a church library, and I read all the Left Behind books just being in the library, and also the Chronicles of Narnia. And like The Last Battle is also basically just like C.S. Lewis being like, what can from the Book of Revelation can I like adapt to Narnia? But like both Narnia, which like I have complicated feelings about The Last Battle that has nothing to do with this episode, and like the last of at least the Left Behind kids books, like it's literally just like, hey, look, it's a new world, it's a better world, it's a paradise. Like, look, from what I can remember. Like I said, like the things I mostly remember from the Left Behind series are like people hiding out in caves and snakes like binding them and sleeping on top of them, and like lots of violence and death and destruction from the Antichrist, who like speaks multiple language and is basically, I think, a communist. But I did read like this parody article of the Left Behind Kids series I linked to in the blog recently. So I might be remembering more what this person like reconstructed through like their memory and not the actual series. But anyway, they were traumatizing. But they did imagine like, quote, a better world in the views of those authors. The Left Behind movie series, for I think kind of obvious reasons, never got that far.
With TV's Kirk Cameron.
God. Right. So I saw that you had put that on. I saw that you had mentioned Left Behind and sort of the stuff. And, part of me just wants to go, that's sort of disaster porn, not true apocalypse, right? It's because the whole rapture thing is such a new invention within Christian theology. And it's only been around for about 200 years. And so we're around at 2000 years, right? So 1800 years, that's not anywhere. And it's so late. I have complicated feelings about it, and none of them are good. Actually, there's no good feelings about it. I take it back.
I don't have good association with it, and I know nothing about that because I'm not particularly Christian. So I agree with my gut feelings agree with you.
Yeah. Well, the main thing. So to be fair, the Book of Revelation has 22 chapters. The first 3 are letters to churches. Then there's 19 chapters left, and it's only the last 2 that you get the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's really quick. 21 and 22 are, hey, here's the good stuff. And then all of the stuff in between, you get this, which is standard for apocalypse. You get this sort of recurring spiral timeline, right? You get repetitions, and you get all of the stuff that comes back around again and again. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, right? And in the midst of that, you get all of these sort of historical, symbolic events and this stuff. So it takes up the bulk of Revelation. And so it's not surprising that becomes so much of the focus of everything else. And that's what we associate with it.
Yeah, except that Revelations is not the only book of the Bible.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
It's literally just that one that people are fascinated with because that's where all the fire and explosions are.
Well, there's part of the book of Daniel that is apocalyptic. Mark chapter 13 is apocalyptic. You get Ezekiel has apocalyptic images as well, right? So plus there's a few extra biblical sources that inform that out of Jewish writings. There's first Enoch, second Baruch, fourth Ezra. Then there's within the Christian sort of worldview, there's the Shepherd of Hermas and the Apocalypse of Peter. You get these sort of things that help us see where this all comes from, but right. It's not, Revelation is one book, and it gets,
the Bible's like 600 pages long. This is
with
like
campus
40
ministry.
of them.
I guess students go,
it's
hey, can
really
we look
not
at
a lot.
Revelation? And I was just like, look, there's 65 other books, man. Let's look at some of those.
Yeah.
I think so.
But
so
there's a dragon.
There is a dragon. Yes.
So do we literally just like this part of the Bible because dragons and apocalypse, and we like a certain amount of disaster?
Sure, there are other books with like wild and crazy stuff, like the story of Gomer, but like, who wants that when you can read the dragon part? I'm being very deeply
that's why I just read The Hobbit.
Yeah. I'm joking. I'm definitely joking. And also, like, I think that, like...
No, I understand, but I think it's like, speaking as somebody, I was raised very briefly in the Mormon faith, and I mean very briefly. It's fascinating. I guess it's just fascinating to understand. I often joke that I only read books and watch television with explosions, which is not entirely wrong. And I'm glad I'm not the only one, although that also concerns me for the state of education in this country.
Well, not only do you have the dragon, you've got the horny beast.
Yeah.
The beast with horns. Sorry, there's a distinction. But yeah, there's lots of imagery. Yes.
Oh no.
I don't want to say it. Right.
The joke had to be made.
Yeah.
Did it though?
I guess I wasn't. Yeah. I guess I wasn't ready with this. There you go.
That's the first time we've ever used on the show, actually.
there is a lot there, and I think that's it is important. Like I said, it's not a huge part of my tradition, so maybe that's why I'm drawn to it, because we just never talk about it, and I want to have ways that we talk about it helpfully, because I think there are lots of ways that we talk about apocalypse. Because I think, what was it? One of the questions you asked, is that you said, is it just speculation in what such an event would look like? Is there a moral question attached to them? And I think the way popular culture deals with it, I think there is a moral question, right? We already mentioned The Walking Dead, and this is what community looks like. This is how we reform community. This is what it looks like, right?
In science fiction, it's also often used as like judgment on, because a lot of science fiction post-apocalypse is actually like a speculative version of like, I mean, it's more dystopian than post-apocalyptic, but go back to Brave New World just because it's a common example. Like, that is a cautionary tale direction of society in the future. So often when you see post-apocalyptic narratives in science fiction, it's about like, oh, this is what our world, if we kept doing the things that we're doing, will look like in 100 years, and it will end the world.
I think
in some cases they're not entirely wrong, actually.
Yeah. I think that like the time machine is definitely dystopian, but also like can be talked about in this conversation, because at the very end of the novel, he does like watch the world die. And like when he goes,
and humans die specifically.
Yeah. And when he goes back, he's like, oh my God, if we don't change our ways, I mean, I'm overplaying this, but oh my God, if we don't change our ways, I will become like the Morlocks. Which also like another thing that terrified me as a kid. I guess I just wanted to deal with my childhood trauma of reading fiction. I don't know. In this episode, but like Morlocks, that's scary. Like the Wishbone episode on the time machine. Nope. I can't read the time machine now without keeping the lights on before I go to sleep.
Well, and all of that also reflects like H.G. Wells' politics. Like H.G. Wells, like advocate of socialism and a lot of other things. But like one of the things he decried, even though he's also a scientist, so, I mean, he foreshadows in his writings a lot of things about anthropocentric thought that Hannah talked about at the beginning of the episode. Like he talks about like basically human beings will be their own demise if we don't learn how to adapt about it. LOC my dissertation. Because he basically he starts writing about like we've actually changed the way nature functions, and if we don't change with it, we will die out. Enter 2020.
And actually, I know you know, but do you know how H.G. Wells connects to Brave New World Huxley as a 6 degrees of separation thing?
I do know, but would you like to explain? I'm assuming we're thinking of the same reason, but you might have a different one. I believe there's actually several.
I mean, probably, but I think that the most obvious one is that
so basically H.G. Wells, when he was studying at the Normal School of London to become a scientist, was taught early eugenic thought by, what was it?
Thomas Henry Huxley.
Thank you, T.H. Huxley.
And T.H. Huxley, I'm sorry. He wrote about ethics and evolution, and he basically was like, just because we think something is morally good doesn't mean that that's actually going to be the trait that's passed on. It's going to be the things that help you survive. And so like and other people who are like real H.G. Wells scholars have written about this. I've just taught it a couple times. H.G. Wells, like whenever you look at the Morlocks and the Lanwi, it's like, oh, they like didn't like adapt based on like their moral goodness or based on like what we would see as desirable traits. They adapted based on like how they fit in with their environment.
Right, because the Eloi and the Morlocks, generally speaking, are often read as a distinct. So, like the Morlocks were like the underground, subterranean kind of, often depicted vaguely monkey-esque, but not really. It's complicated. Like underground mole people. They're depicted as mole people, weird, fuzzy mole people. Are usually read as basically descendants of like the British working class.
Wait a minute, I'm in the time machine.
No.
Wayne, you're in the time machine? You're in the Bible?
Wayne, you're
wow.
Wayne, I'm just going to ask this once. Are you the Antichrist?
If he were the Antichrist, could he say that?
I don't know.
Depends what stage. Depends what stage.
Also, we can't put it on air because I'm pretty sure YouTube will
it will get tagged. Yeah.
Although we're not monetized yet, so that doesn't matter yet. So basically, like like H.G. Wells is read, the Eloi are read as the basically the aristocratic class, which is why you see, I would say, spoiler alert, but the novel's literally over 100 years old. You basically see the Morlocks actually are the dominant species now because they actually feed off of the Eloi, because the Eloi like have just become like basically domesticated like, sheep. Because they can't actually work for themselves. They can't actually make things. They can't farm. They can't do anything. So the Morlocks actually run the world because they, despite being like the descendants of the world, the descendants of the lower classes, and therefore, don't have the sort of high society prestige, they're the ones that actually know how to, feed themselves, make machinery and all these other things. Where was I going with that? Why was I talking about this? Oh, but so the whole thing with it is important to note that both T.H. Huxley and Wells at various points in history are advocates of eugenics. And for listeners who might not be aware of that, eugenics is basically the principle of engineering basically who lives and who dies in order to, and I'm talking about people specifically, who lives and who dies to create the most advantageous gene pool. So we see examples of it in places like North Carolina and California up until, I believe, into the 70s, of like the forced sterilization of women, particularly women of color, also women who have various mental conditions and things like that. So this has a long history, not just in the olden times. But I think, but one of the things that I find really interesting about both T.H. Huxley and H.G. Wells is that they, out of this kind of like, I think we can all pretty much agree that eugenics is bad.
Eugenics bad. Very bad.
Eugenics bad. In case, for some reason, some listener out there has any illusions about morality, eugenics bad.
Yes.
But I think one of the interesting things is once Wells, people start pointing out this criticism to him, he, in his letters and in his in various interactions with scientists, he starts rethinking, like, well, what do we do with this information about, like, knowing how evolution works and knowing how society, because one of the things also Wells started doing is he started thinking about how social conditions, hence why he's a socialist, social conditions shape evolution. So he's a very capacious understanding of the environment. And he started to actually argue for, we actually have to create something like utopia because that's actually what's killing us. There's a lot of like research that's coming out in the latter part of the 20th and 21st century, talking about the way, we call it the social determinants of health, but it's basically the way that your environment and your genetics essentially interact to create things like, when we're looking at, for example, in COVID, we see that like pandemics hit Black and Brown communities, particularly poor Black and Brown communities, much harder. H.G. Wells was thinking about that when he was thinking about all of these various questions. And I think part of that starts to come out in the Time Machine. And when we're looking at, it's the social conditions of labor and prestige that create this evolutionary tract. And then ultimately, like Hannah talked about, it's on the end of the world. That was a really roundabout way of explaining things. Hi, never bring up things that have to do with my dissertation. Apparently, I will go off on a very long tangent.
Maybe that was my plan all along.
Okay. But I think it's Wells is an interesting example because he didn't write fiction with the intent to write fiction. He talks about this a lot. He doesn't see himself as a novelist in the classical sense. He wrote essays to prove political points.
Wait,
so when you look at his version of apocalyptic fiction, what a concept,
I've never heard that before. I need to change my entire dissertation.
But, actually at the time, though, this was one of the reasons, also to see my dissertation, he would have arguments with people like Henry James. He actually believed that fiction's primary purpose, or one of its primary purposes, was ideological, whereas people who, like Henry James, who wanted to be seen primarily as artists with a capital A, but really disliked that. Because they wanted to be seen as documentarians of culture. Wells had a very different perspective influenced by his background as a journalist, and especially he comes from poverty, which I think changes his perspective on what literature is for. I could go on to a big diatribe as to why exactly that is, but H.G. Wells in his autobiography basically says that literature saved his life, more or less. Like literature is the reason why he did not spend the rest of his life in poverty. And I think so for him, thinking about H.G. Wells writing things like The Time Machine, his other kind of post-apocalyptic or dystopian literature, I think he takes it very personally, which goes back to, I think, some of the conversations we've had earlier is like why these things resonate is because, for someone like Henry James, who grew up in, comparative economic comfort and stability his entire life, quite actually extreme economic comfort and stability considering the time period, I think those things were more personal to H.G. Wells because he lived in a much greater state of economic precarity for most of his life and saw the effects of it, like more on top of that. And so I think I think that goes to why we start seeing these things and these stories, and they start hitting harder in periods where things are really difficult. Like I would not be surprised if out of 2020 comes a whole new generation of dystopian and post-apocalyptic, movies, film, that was redundant, television shows and things like that, just because like people will have a personal experience with it on a scale that I don't think we've seen in a very long time.
I think you're right. I mean, you are right. Yeah. And I only say that because
it only happens once a year.
As you're talking about this, all I'm thinking about that I think if I want to liken this back to sort of biblical categories, which that's just sort of my thing. The literature, the science fiction, and even fantasy, all of this stuff comes into places where it's far more prophetic. And I mean that in the sense of fitting within the category of the prophets, because the prophets they're not about foretelling things. They're about speaking the word of the Lord, right? So many of the prophets are far more interested in dealing with economic injustices, right? In the way that the rich treat the poor folk, right? Which is pretty much everybody at the time, except, a small handful.
Wait a minute. Are you saying the Bible is socialist?
I might have said that. I didn't say that. I could have said that. If you inferred that from what I said, I don't know what to tell you, Mav. I will tell you, it is certainly not capitalist. Look, there are many critiques of socialism that I might have too, but it is not a manuscript for capitalism.
No, it's not.
So, but
Also,
there's no good rich person
not the only
portrayed in
thing.
it, but. No, so going back to this whole thing, like you talk about apocalypse, and there is a prophetic edge to that apocalypse. And I've been reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower and Talents, right, over the past couple months, right? And I am ready to anoint her as a prophet. Like that stuff is totally pushing towards a really possible terrible end. It's so it fits more with that sense of, oh, this is the terrible stuff. People pay attention, wake up, change it. Than full out apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe one of the flaws of like focusing on the explosions basically is if we're going to argue that most of these narratives are, I'm trying to think what's a really horrible one. Geostorm. Geostorm really is a warning about climate change, right? It's like, don't fuck it up. That's what the story is, right? And if most of these movies have that message, if most of the books have that message, then you focus on the explosion, and maybe that gets lost. Like it's not just the stuff that Brian was saying at the beginning about like there being a better look on the other side. You have to actually look at these things and say, well, what is this trying to tell me? How do I avoid the world turning into zombies or the Statue of Liberty being buried in the sand or the water?
Don't be stupid during a pandemic.
Wear a mask. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the. But given what we do, we run into so many people who are like who say, and we've talked about this on the show before. Back in my day, comics didn't used to be political. Back in my day, movies didn't used to be political. No, back in your day, you were stupid. Like that was you just didn't understand.
Or you were very sheltered.
You might still be.
Yeah.
I think that like a lot of these narratives, like, well, what some people might take from them is like we should be more personally responsible. But I think that a lot of these narratives, like just some contemporary authors like David Mitchell or Colson Whitehead, they're thinking about systems like, global corporations and like my favorite term, unfettered capitalism. Thinking about like the problems with corporations and like the larger systems that rule our lives, and then the question is okay, if that's the case, then like what can the individual person really do? Because it feels like this train is not slowing down, because as people have pointed out specifically with big corporations, like the rich are getting richer during this pandemic while the rest of us are being squeezed.
Right, and I think like so many of these quote unquote apocalyptic trends in like modern society. Like they are things that I was just watching a bunch of videos this morning about fast fashion, because fashion is one of the most destructive industries right now on the planet, from both an environmental standpoint and a labor standpoint. And because I sew, that's a really big, that's a fairly large conversation with the sewing community, simultaneously recognizing, however, that the individual consumer has so little agency to really intervene with that outside of I can personally boycott all of the fast fashion companies I want, but unfortunately, and I do actually, but a lot of it has to do with systems outside of our control, which are both like governmental regulation and what companies have been allowed to do, not only within the United States, but globally. But also like part of it I think is interesting is also like the way that cultural expectation has changed. Like we now expect, and I say we, particularly speaking about like the Western world, specifically like the United States and parts of Europe, we own more clothes, for example, than at any other point in human history. And we expect to own more clothes and go through them more quickly at any point of history. And I think that there's probably similar versions of that apply to almost every other aspect of this. For example, like bigger houses and all these other things, which are all things that kind of like pop up in a lot of these stories. Is basically, it's not just, these systems, but it's also the ways that culture has shifted to accommodate these systems. And it's kind of like, I don't know if it's a chicken and egg kind of situation, but because of both of those together, it feels like what do you do to change it short of a global disaster that breaks both of those systems simultaneously?
Ozymandias.
Oh, Lord. Do not let our listeners think that you're backing him up.
I'm not. But I'm asking the question of, true to Hannah's original point. Why do we love these stories? Mm-hmm. You would think that logically, you'd think that we're in the middle of hell right now, as far as 2020 has gone with, pandemics and murder hornets and whatnot.
Murder hornets are at least on hiatus right now.
Sleeping force, but we're in the middle of. So you'd almost think that no one would want to hear about this sort of stuff right now. You'd think that it would just be, last week we did the Marble League show because we wanted to talk about something whimsical, right? And you
sure sign of the apocalypse.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on. Don't. Wait.
No, we're making the Marble League show an annual thing now.
I get one pure thing. Just one.
But Jesus. We're
I'm the Antichrist, remember?
Yeah.
You can't say that. You're not allowed to. We're going to get demonetized.
Yeah, if we're doing this thing where we're looking for escape, we also are sort of, I do think that there's a inclination to watch these sort of, apocalyptic things. I've talked to so many people who have watched the pandemic documentary on Netflix during this pandemic. And I wonder if part of this is, are we looking for meaning, right? Maybe we do like these things where the world is blowing up because the world feels like it's blowing up. And, maybe it's a little too real to talk about this invisible illness that is like, sort of killing people left and right, sort of seemingly randomly. But, I can handle some aliens. I can handle. I can handle a rock hurtling towards the earth. I can do that. Yeah.
I've had some friends say though that like they were watching Walking Dead and they just can't do that right now. The current circumstances have made that too real, so they need even more of an escape. But I think you're right.
Marble League.
I'll recommend Marble League. But I think you're right, Matt. I think there's a certain amount of one of the purposes of fiction is we can displace our anxieties onto this narrative. We can watch these things in a very different way than affecting our real life.
And during our Comfort TV episode where Katya and I just want to talk about the Great British Bake Off, people did comment and say, I'm watching these dark shows and it's not just, like the happy things that are bringing me comfort.
It's cathartic, I think.
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
And I think part of it might also be like, especially I think in the early days of the pandemic when a lot of us were glued to like news feeds and Twitter feeds of like every single update.
That's me every day.
That's because Matt. That's because you have things going on that I don't really understand. But I think that there is an aspect of like you can't stop watching the train that's about to crash kind of aspect, or like the house that's on fire. It's like even if it's not enjoyable in like a fun sense that there is something about it, like you can't look away. And maybe that these shows, because it's not the thing that's happening in real life, we're able to kind of like satiate that impulse without it being too close to what's actually happening to us.
Well,
So like, for example, we can watch the show about aliens that Mav mentioned, or zombies, or whatever, but because it's not, you know,
you can save yourself from a zombie with a machete in a way that doesn't affect the coronavirus.
And you know,
right, because a machete can save you from the zombie. It can't save you from creeping global capitalism.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you're going to have an armed revolution, which is an entirely different thing.
Right.
Well, but I think that's part of it, is that within classic apocalypticism, there is a triumphalist movement, right? That encourages people to remain faithful, but within the sense of the movie and narrative apocalypses that we have, right? It still is about, I think, the sense of human fortitude and human accomplishment and achievement. Like, very few apocalypses, broadly understood within science fiction, are going to end with the end of the world. Happens occasionally as sort of the warning, but
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, that begins.
Even then, like a new species or something usually takes over. It's not the end of the universe. It might be the end of people as we understand it. But
but I still think most of the times what it's going to do is point us to humans. You can do it. Come on, everybody, band together.
We can rebuild society. Yeah,
that's what Good Omens like kind of does. It's like, well, the angel and the demon have fallen so in love with the world that they don't even want the apocalypse to begin because they want their sushi. I mean, Wait, are they just?
That's right.
Are they just? Are they just like the most bourgeois people in the world? I mean, by people, I mean very close.
I mean,
here's the reason I love it, because I love Good Omens, and like I said, that's one of we covered this at the campus ministry last year. We watched it and talked about it, because most of the time, right, there's particularly within American Christianity, there's the looking for the pie in the sky. Look, we don't have to worry about this world. We're going to go to a new one, right? But apocalypticism is not about in Revelation, heaven and earth come dwell together, right? And it's not about escaping it. It's about helping create the thing that's coming. But it means that this creation matters. Like the world itself matters. We were about plague and pestilence. Damn it, I want to care about the world because sushi is wonderful. It's a good thing. I like it, you know? Yeah. I don't want to just live in a world where I just worry about spiritual stuff. That's Plato read back into Christianity through Augustine stuff that has dominated us for 1600 years. So
have we resolved anything besides Good Omens is the best one?
Watch Good Omens. Marble League is cathartic and will distract you from the impending fire of the universe.
Wayne is wrong.
And don't be a eugenicist. Those are the three I got.
Eugenics is bad. Eugenics bad.
Eugenics bad.
Do not do eugenics. Do not. I mean, I just can't even believe that became a topic of conversation on today's show. But I guess
it was
and the problem is,
deeply
it's also there's quarters. This is another show, but there's quarters where eugenics is starting to rear its head again because humans are trash.
Which is why I want to make it very clear that we here at Vox Popcast, as an official statement, are firmly on the side of eugenics bad. Yeah. That's not what we're recommending.
And if you are on the side of eugenics good, I don't want you to listen to this show. I don't want to be associated with you. And you need to go sit in a corner of your home and have some very deep conversations with yourself.
But first, give us a 5-star review on iTunes and let us.
Exactly.
Yes, that we helped you rethink your stance on eugenics to believe that eugenics bad.
Yeah, so we'll resolve nothing.
No. But I mean, again, like always, fun conversation. That it is. There is so much going on in the real world that I think that, you have to sort of give a pass and say, sometimes it's just nice to watch the Statue of Liberty blow up or the White House blow up or the Eiffel Tower, or there's a lot of blowing up stuff in these movies. Right. And I think there is a deeper meaning, but I think a lot of that happens on a subconscious level. And we're just trying to, I think a lot of it is escapism. But
explosion's pretty.
Yeah, I love a good explosion. There's no
there are no explosions in the. No, there are. I think a little bit of explosions in The Last Man. There are far less explosions in The Last Man than there should be for it being as long as it is. Mary Shelley.
It's okay. Mary Shelley was trying to, make her way as a serious novelist while also writing about weird monsters and stuff. I get it.
Also,
when she listens to the show in the past, I'm sure she'll
fix it.
Also, I want to make it clear.
If there's anyone who's like a historical time traveler, I would buy that Mary Shelley somehow ran into a time machine. That I would accept.
Fair enough.
I would also like to make it clear that I do not subscribe to any of Mary Shelley's politics as a general rule. That's all. Just for the one 18th centuryist listening to this show.
And on that note,
Brian, thanks for joining us. Tell people about your show and where they can hear more of you.
So we are Church of the Geek. We have we release every week. We're on most platforms: iTunes, Spotify, podcast. Like we're in a lot of feeds. We're pretty much everywhere. Sam and I deal with geek culture and its intersection with faith, and have talked about a whole lot of things all over the board. So check us out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Palindrome Hannah.
You can follow me on Twitter at Hanley Rogers, but honestly, you might as well just follow the people I linked in the show notes because they're more interesting than I am. Yeah.
You are the worst at promoting yourself ever.
And yet I'm still on this show, so who's the real genius here?
Katya. Also a genius, but also where can people find you?
Well, that was weird. You can find me on Instagram at Just That Nerd Kid. And there might actually be I usually do sewing content. There might actually be some more nerd content coming up because sometime this fall, I'm making a suit vaguely based off of Agent Carter, but also with a bunch of stuff that one of my friends gave me from the Spanish Civil War. So that'll be weird.
And Wayne.
I got nothing this week.
He just doesn't exist outside the podcast.
I know it's not like his Instagram feed goes away. I'll be linking to it in the show notes anyway. But it's just like, oh yeah, you can't follow me.
Nothing new. Like I've actually promoted a couple specific things the last couple of shows.
Last couple times you've been on,
I have nothing specific to promote this time. So all the typical places you can find me.
Hey, can I throw one more thing in? I'm sorry. I forgot because I don't think I said at Geek Church is where we're at Twitter, but also I've also become more and more involved with TheoCon, which Mav, you were at last year.
Yeah.
And so the 17th, 18th, 19th of September, which we were going to be in person in Pittsburgh for our con, we are actually now online. So if you check out theocon.live, our website there, you'll see some of the stuff that's going out there.
I'll link TheoCon in the show notes. We do that a lot. We've had quite a few of the organizers on at various different points.
I know.
Yeah, but let's see. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, always at Chris Maverick, or you can follow my blog, though I haven't been updating it because I've been way busy. See the beginning of the show at www.chrismaverick.com. You can follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where we talk about what we're going to be talking about next week and future weeks. And you can comment on individual episodes that you've listened to, or you can comment on future shows. You could also follow the show on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, always at Vox Popcast. You can follow us on YouTube. Please subscribe to our new YouTube channel. We talked about it a couple of times. We need more subscribers. We're trying to build that and, unlock. YouTube's weird. You gotta get to certain subscriber levels in order to unlock more features. It's odd, but it's fun. You can watch enhanced versions of the shows with visual content so that you can see examples of what we're talking about. If you enjoy the show, we certainly hope you do. Otherwise, why have you been listening to us this long? Please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review, especially on iTunes. And that helps other people find the show by goosing the algorithm and moving us up the charts, especially if you don't just leave a rating, but you write a review. Just tell us what you like about the show. Tell us what you enjoy. Tell us, tell us what your feelings on the world blowing up are. Anything like that. We'd also love it if you leave us comments on our YouTube pages, like and subscribe, all that sort of things. All the things that people say at the end of all of these podcasts that you listen to. Please do those for us too. It really helps. I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd once again like to thank Brian for joining us. I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
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 And you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist.